Have you heard of Flint, Michigan? Okay. So, as you know, the Flint water crisis has been going on for 4 years. The media left Flint long ago, and they basically left poor black people, poor white people to fend for themselves after being poisoned by their government. I have a major investigative piece that I've been working on now for 6 months, and I'm happy to announce that piece will be published next week. I wish I had the production to put off fireworks and stuff like that, because I'm very excited that this piece is getting out. I believe it will be about, I believe it will be out next Tuesday. I believe, hopefully, if we can get enough traction on it on social media, that it might help residents get armed with information, nothing else, to push the change that they deserve. I think the piece will show very clearly that the science that has been used, the testing that has been done to declare the water safe and normal and restored, let's just say is seriously flawed. And that's putting it generously. So that will be out next week. It will be out in a publication that is progressive. I will tell the story very soon of all the publications that said no to this piece, majority of which chose not even to read it. We'll get to that later. But it will be out next week. Stay tuned. We'll be doing some promotional things to get you ready for it. And please spread the word once this piece is out. I think hopefully, if done right, hopefully it can save lives. But I need you to help me spread it. All this social media suppression, I need you to help me spread it. So, you know, it's interesting that Governor Snyder declared Flint's water, quote, restored. Because apparently Genesee County, which Flint is part of, doesn't seem to agree with the governor. Here we go. Genesee County Health Department urges Flint residents to continue using filters. So Governor Snyder, as you know, ended the free water bottle pods where residents could get free water a couple weeks ago, saying that the water is restored. Well, here we go. Is Flint's water safe to drink? Residents are being flooded with contradicting statements over the condition of their water. Weeks ago, the state announced it would end bottled water distribution because the city's water is safe to drink. But the county health department is saying not so fast. The Genesee County Health Department is warning residents to keep using filters and bottled water. Quote, "It's just getting so confusing on who to believe about what," said Karen Eaton, Flint resident. Eaton wishes the state and everybody else would just get on the same page when it comes to the safety of Flint's water. Quote, "It's mostly irritating and having to have a filter on my brand new faucet makes me mad," Eaton said. She said it doesn't make her as mad as the state announcing last month that it was ending the water distribution sites, saying the water quality in Flint was comparable to other cities across the country. That's the talking point that the government, the state, and the EPA has been using. Now Flint's water is just dandy compared to the other cities across America. The state said using a filter was a matter of personal choice for residents who had their lead service lines replaced. John McKellar with the Genesee County Health Department is urging people to use filters no matter what the state is saying. The concern is for people that might have a low immune system. Young children or anyone that is concerned with anything that the filters might not catch should continue to use bottled water, McKellar said. McKellar said the county just wanted to remind everyone that an emergency declaration is still in place in the county, and the closing down of the pods doesn't necessarily mean that people should stop using precautions. Flint residents said they would rather be safe than sorry. Quote, "That's how we got to the situation in the first place, is a government not doing what they're supposed to," said Stephanie Hardin Clark, Flint resident. The health department said if you don't have access to bottled water and are in a high-risk group, using a filter and then boiling your water should make it safe to use. Oh boy. So, where do I even begin? First of all, as a reminder, the piece that is coming out next week, I believe, will show without a shadow of a doubt that the talking point they're using, that the water is now, compared to other cities, the levels of lead in the water is now normal. I believe my piece will show that is highly suspect. I believe it will show that the science that has been used and the water testing that has been done is severely inadequate. I believe it will show that it's not just inadequate in Flint, but across the country. And I believe it will show that water utilities in Flint and elsewhere are essentially cheating the system and getting around already inadequate EPA regulations to declare water safe when it's not safe, because they don't want to actually pay to replace lead service lines, to fix plumbing in people's homes, and to do the extensive testing that needs to be done all over the city. It will show that small sample sizes are being used all over the country, particularly in Flint, to declare water safe for poisoned, poor communities. It will show that imperfect and very flawed historical records are being used for this water testing to say we're testing homes most at risk for lead. I've dumbed down the piece as much as I can, but I hope you will read the whole thing. I believe they haven't edited it yet, but it's a couple thousand words. But it's the most important thing I've ever written about or reported on, and I hope you'll read it and you'll share it, because to me, lives are at stake, not only in Flint, but all over this country. And frankly, if I'm keeping it real, I would like to go back to Flint as soon as possible. I just don't have the money to do it. Just being honest, I don't have the funding to do it. Our Patreon funding is not big enough yet for me to go out on the road more often. I definitely would like to go back to Flint. I'd like to go to other communities to cover water contamination and straight up corruption and a lot of other stories. Just need your help. So thank you to those who have subscribed. If you haven't, I hope you'll consider. You could do it as low as $1 a month, $3 a month, $5 a month, and higher. Or you could go to my PayPal, paypal.me/JordanChariton. PayPal.me/JordanChariton. But while Genesee County is telling its residents keep using filters, even though the governor says, no, it's fine, the water's fine now. All of a sudden, Mark Edwards, who is the scientist from Virginia Tech, who originally said the water crisis, who originally found alarming levels of lead in the water, and he's been heralded as a hero by the media. He's been heralded as like the troublemaker scientist by a New York Times profile. He's won all sorts of awards. He just got $2 million in grant money from the EPA to do similar testing that he did in Flint, in other communities. All of a sudden today, he kind of said that the lead levels in Flint were not really that out of ordinary compared to history in Flint. Let me read this to you and share this video. Mayor Karen Weaver says Hurley Medical Center doctors who voted to no longer use the phrase, quote, lead poisoned when referring to Flint children are disrespecting the community. But the doctors are getting support from Mark Edwards, the Virginia Tech professor who first helped expose elevated levels of lead in city water. Weaver and Flint's chief public health advisor, Pamela Pugh, issued statements in a Tuesday, May 22nd news release, taking issue with what Hurley said was a unanimous vote at an annual meeting of physicians last week. Doctors agreed to discontinue the word poisoned when the medical staff communicates as a collective body about Flint children. Quote, hearing that Hurley doctors are attempting to minimize damages when it comes to the lives of Flint residents concerns me, Weaver said. That kind of behavior is disrespectful to our community and unbelievably insensitive to what we have endured over the past 4 years. I am personally offended by the decision a few Hurley doctors have made because it minimizes the tragedy that Flint residents have experienced through no fault of their own. Dr. Hernan Gomez, a toxicologist, pediatrician, and emergency physician at Hurley, led the push to dump term lead poisoned, saying it is inaccurate and stigmatizes children from the city. No, I think what stigmatizes the children from the city is the extreme levels of lead they have in their bodies. That's what stigmatizes them, nothing else. Flint residents were lead exposed during the water crisis, Gomez said, but that exposure did not meet the medical definition of poisoning. I mean, have you ever heard of something so ridiculous? What meets the definition of poisoning? What do they have to, like, their face have to go green? Like blood gushing out of them? What meets the medical definition of being poisoned? Can somebody tell me this? But it gets better. It gets better. Here we go. Edwards, Edwards, who again is the Virginia Tech scientist who first found the high levels of lead, he's been credited as a hero. He pretty much goes after anybody that questions his science. Edwards said he supports the use of the term lead exposed, calling the term lead poisoned certainly loaded. Quote, while it's technically accurate that any lead exposure will cause some neurological harm, it is also important to provide historical context. The water lead exposures that occurred in Flint from 2014 to 2015, and by the way are still happening, but let's not state facts here. The water lead exposure that occurred in Flint from 2014 to 2015 are not outside the norms of recent history in Flint or what is still occurring daily in other U.S. cities, Edwards said. While I condemn any effort to downplay the health harm, it is irresponsible to create an impression that the average child in Flint was either lead poisoned or permanently brain damaged as a result of the 2014-2015 water lead exposure. Oh my boy, oh my lord, oh my lord, oh my lord. How do I even begin? So, first of all, I don't live in Flint, but I have enough sources in Flint, and I've reported in Flint enough to tell you when he says, what did he say? It is important to provide historical context. The water lead exposures that occurred in Flint from 2014 to 2015 are not outside the norms of recent history in Flint. What norms is he talking about? When were lead levels in Flint that high? There were lead levels, there was one lead level found at 22,000 parts per billion. Are you aware that the EPA's action level for lead in water, action level means like the minimum that they're okay with, is 15? I believe 22,000 is a lot higher than 15. And what historical time period are you comparing what happened not in 2014 to 2015, but what is still happening? There are still very high lead levels being found in the city of Flint, which I will show you in the story that's being published next week. There are still insanely high lead levels being found in some schools in Flint. Yet the governor and Mr. Edwards declared the water restored and normal compared to other cities. But what historical time period did Flint citywide have lead levels way above the EPA action level? You want to know when? Never. That's why you never heard about a Flint water crisis in the 80s or the 90s. Was it possible that there was some lead, coming out of pipes here and there? Yeah, particularly when there's construction going on in streets and, pipes get kicked around by construction work. That happens in Flint and other cities. But I really don't know what he's talking about when he says, again, the lead exposure, not poisoning, the exposure that occurred in 2014 to 2015 are not outside the norms of recent history in Flint, or what is still occurring daily in other U.S. cities. Well, I got news for you, Mr. Edwards. It's not normal. That's not a norm, first of all. And secondly, again, because the corporate media and the Flint Journal, which essentially consistently just regurgitates whatever the hell scientists like Mark Edwards tell them without actually asking any questions or having any scrutiny, a real journalist would have said, what historical period had the same levels of lead than in 2014 to 2015? Can you explain that? I want to make sure my audience has the right information. But because I'm the Flint Journal, which, little secret I've learned on the road, corporate national media is terrible, but local corporate media is just as bad. They are asleep at the switch because they're just as corporate and they're just as lazy and they're just as lacking journalistic ethics as the big boys and gals on our TVs and at the New York Times. So they'll just regurgitate bullshit that Mark Edwards or anyone else tells them. But I think saying that, trying to minimize the lead levels from 2014 to 2015, calling it, they're lead exposed, they're not lead poisoned. First of all, what is the main reason that this is an issue? Why do you care? Why is this an issue that we have to mince about the wording? Lead exposed, lead poisoning. They were poisoned. And by the way, I've interviewed enough to know there was permanent brain damage done to children and adults. One gentleman had such bad lead poisoning, and not just lead, other heavy metals and bacteria, that he could no longer drive, his memory was shot, and he had rampant mood swings. That's called brain damage. But no. No. They were just exposed. Just exposed, not poisoned. So I'd love to know. I'd love to know what exactly he's talking about, which historical time period in Flint had the same levels of lead poisoning that Flint had in 2014 and 2015, and what other cities in America, you're saying compared to other cities, had this level of lead poisoning citywide. I'd love to know that.